to Spectrum TV. Karen Tui Boys here, and another episode of Building Relationships and Resilience. It's been an action-packed few episodes, and I am delighted to be able to introduce a friend and colleague, Anne Riches from Australia. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Karen.
So I'm excited about having a chat with you today because we're going to be talking about this whole minefield issue and relating to resilience and to relationships and understanding what's really going on in this mind of ours, really. So let's just get underway, I think. So tell us, what is a minefield?
Well, we all know what a minefield is, and that's the really interesting first point, to know that we're talking about a minefield, not a minefield, but they are exactly the same, really, except with a minefield, you're talking about what we sadly know to be the reality for wars and other disputed territories and so on. But for the minefield, it's that stuff that goes on all the time in our brain. I mean, we talk about minefields as having booby traps and hazards and tripwires. And, you know, you think about everything that you think about that soldiers and others and civilians have to deal with minefields. And then you think, well, actually, I can use almost every single one of those words to what's going on in our minds. And so that's why I came up with the concept of the minefield, because one of the things that I heard people say when they were talking about minefields is that the constant theme for them is, where is it? Where did that come from? What do I have to look out for? And when you think about it, with the minefield, and I've been writing about this since the early 2000s, we're constantly saying, where did that come from? Why did I react like that? Why did he or she react like that? I just didn't see that coming. That's what the minefield is.
Yeah. So I want to let the listeners know, Anne, that you teach people how to navigate this minefield, and you also talk a lot about emotional and mental health issues. And you've had 30 years, I think you must have started when you were 3, 30 years experience in guiding organisations to be emotionally smart and mentally savvy workplaces. So I love that. And this really is also so important in the teaching field, to understand this minefield and what's happening. So and by the way, for the viewers, please type in questions you have in the chat field. I'll look at those. And as we, chat between the two of us, but if you've got something you want to add or ask, please do. So where do you start understanding this whole minefield?
Say that again?
Where do you start?
Where do you start? Sorry, that New Zealand accent.
Sorry.
But every now and again. Where do you start? Well, I mean, for me, the most important thing is to understand how your brain works. And so that's where I started some 30 odd years ago, understanding a little neuroscience, to understand kind of like, I was really curious about why we are the way we are, what makes us this way. And you would know, as everybody knows, that we have a brain that, for just simple purposes, but far from simplistic, we have a part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain, and we have this other part of the brain, the limbic system, which is responsible, some people say it's the emotional heart, the center of our feelings. And deep in the heart of that, there is this thing called the amygdala. There's a pair of them on either side of your brain. And everybody knows about the amygdala, and they know it as the fear factory, if you like. But there are some things around the amygdala, which I happen to call the almonds, because that's what amygdala is, Greek for almonds. And if you've heard me speak before, and others have, I talk about the almond effect. And that's because the amygdala and that limbic part of our system doesn't think. It doesn't have any judgment. It doesn't act rationally. That's this part of the brain that does that. So with a minefield, it's understanding that we've got two parts of the brain operating almost simultaneously, but the limbic system, that fear factory, that response to threat, that acts, well, it's about 0.2 of a second faster than the thinking system. So the minefield is when we tread on a booby trap a tripwire. Our brain perceives a threat because we're not actually physically doing it. The brain doesn't know the difference between a physical and a psychological threat now. But we hear something, see something, taste something, all the senses, and the amygdala perceives it as a threat, and we just go off. If we know that, then we can start to understand why we are in fight or flight or freeze or flock mode, which is what the amygdala does.
So that's fascinating. So it reacts about 2 seconds faster than you're thinking.
Much faster than that. A blink of an eye. But there's a marvelous writer, neuroscientist called Benjamin Libet, who Libet for anyone who wants to follow it through. And he did a lot of work in the middle of last century in the concept of free will and free want. And as it was very controversial about whether we have free will or not, but as part of that, he was trying to actually track the difference in timing between when our subconscious, in fact, when we consciously are aware of something compared to when our subconscious is aware of it. Because that's when the amygdala is clicking in at that subconscious point. It's about between 0.2 and 0.5 of a second before we actually notice it in a conscious way. So that means we've got to work really fast to pick up the signs that we are in a limbic moment, if you like.
That's quite fascinating. So it's making so that your brain is actually making decisions and reacting before you're even aware of it.
Absolutely spot on, aren't you? Well, this is why I love talking to you. You get this stuff so fast. That's exactly the point. But a lot of people don't know that. And so it's, if you know that, then you're almost well and truly on the path to being able to navigate it, because you know that something is happening sooner than you actually know. Really weird, isn't it? Metacognition. You know what you know, but you don't actually know at the time. And so what you have to do is, because that subconscious part of your brain has triggered this kind of immediate response to what it perceives as a threat, whether it be real or not, and if you think about it, threats, that whole thing evolved because of saber-toothed tigers, really. Well, we haven't got those anymore, but COVID's doing a pretty damn good imitation, I reckon. So if we know that we've got that split second in order to do something, we have to say, well, what does our brain tell us? What could we actually tap into very quickly before our thinking brain works? And that thing that we can tap into is how our body is responding, because our body is immediately setting us up for fight, flight, freeze or flocking, and it's doing it before we even realize it.
So I want to come back to that recognizing the body, but I'm also wondering, and this is just a ping in my head right now, is this sometimes maybe one of the causes of a bit of deja vu? It's like I'd already thought that, or I'd already, I don't know, just like.
I don't know. It could be. I hadn't actually thought that. You're clever. But I imagine because the way the amygdala works and works out whether something is a threat or not, I think you're probably onto something, because the way I describe it, very technical term, Karen, I say that the amygdala senses something, uses one of the 5 senses and notices something. So it notices something, and then it has to decide whether or not it's going to send you into one of these 4 Fs that I talk about. To do that, it goes to what I call our database of nasty things. Which happens to be DNT, which works really well in the minefield analogy.
Right.
And so in the database of nasty things, that is, in fact, it could well include deja vu. It's the summary, if you like, of everything that's ever happened to us in our lives that we have perceived as a threat or not. And the challenge with that is, of course, it includes things that we've seen ourselves and has happened to us ourselves. Like, you might have had an email from the boss saying, "I need to talk to you now." Well, it could be that they were going to offer you a pay rise, but past history might say, "Oh, don't want to go there." So so the brain has stored the amygdala, the database of nasty things, has stored away all these other things that have happened to you. The difficulty is that it's also storing away everything else that it thinks might be relevant. And that's a real challenge. I'm really perceiving that right now in this, if we can call it the COVID era, because we're reading stuff on social media. I mean, we're reading, and I don't know whether they're true or not, but we're reading theories and ideas about where COVID came from, where it's going to, when will borders open up, when will they not, all these kinds of things. And it is true, isn't it, right now, that we don't know how to sort fact from fiction. And the amygdala doesn't know how to sort fact from fiction. So it always errs on the side of protection. After all, that's what it's there for, survival.
So let's come back to the body. So it's about noticing what's going on in your body first.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I describe that and how I lead groups and have worked with groups for years around this stuff is to say they've got to learn to identify what we call their stress signature, because the body's in stress. So, and the stress signature is what physiological stuff is happening. So it could be, for example, your heart is racing. It could be that you feel sick. It could be that, people get a crick in their neck. It could be, and you see it a lot, don't you? People tamping their foot. It could be. I had a guy in a group once, and he just took a pan like this, and he would flick it round and round and round and round and round, and it was quite clear, not just to me, but the rest of the group, they're going absolutely, well, kind of like, would this guy please stop? And I looked at him and I said, let's call him Fred. I said, Fred, do you know what you're doing with your pen? He said, what?
They never
didn't even know. And I said, what are you feeling? Because that's also part of it, to be able to know what you're feeling at any particular time. I said, what are you feeling? He said, oh, I'm a bit anxious. And I said, and you're showing it by twisting your pen. And so it could be, it's so individual. And I guess one of the most important things to make clear is that with a minefield, in a military sense, you can map it, and then you've got a reasonable idea about predictability, about where the traps are, where the things to watch out for are. And it's not going to change that particular minefield. But with a minefield, we're all so different that even what we think could be predictable for us now might change tomorrow. And I think COVID has shown us that. And it's shown us that in terms of our resilience and our relationships. I mean, many of us would have thought we were pretty resilient people up until the beginning of this year. And then suddenly we find ourselves racked with fears, thoughts, worries, concerns we never thought would ever bother us before. And so it's the unpredictability of it, the ever-changing nature of it, and the fact that every single brain, every single human, like every single thumbprint is different. So this is an ongoing journey. You can't just master a minefield, someone's minefield, your partner's minefield, thought, oh, I got them now, that's it, we're all sorted. You have no idea, it's changing rapidly.
It occurs to me, Anne, that this is useful for teachers to know, because when you see the child clicking the pen or rotating the pen or the leg going up or down or whatever, that it's not necessarily that they're trying to annoy somebody, and often they don't know they're clicking that pen, but they're actually just showing some physical sign of being anxious.
Yeah, I'd encourage people to just ask the question. I mean, you can't assume that. It could be that people do that, because they do want to be annoying, but it's unlikely I'm not the teacher here, so teachers might have a different view. But from my perspective, most people aren't setting out to be annoying. And so with adults or children, my sense is that we should never assume, and that's one of the big traps that we fall into all the time. We assume things. And we should ask. We should ask. Do you even sort of a simple thing like, do you know you are clicking the pen?
Well, mostly don't.
most people don't.
No.
So that's where I'd start, just sort of observing that behaviour. But I also think, for us, it's not just about observing other people. To have these conversations around what's going on for someone else, I like to think about it of what's above the surface and what's below the surface. Again, just like a minefield, what you can see, the circumstances that people are going through, like they're having to homeschool, they've had their hours cut back, they don't know about their job security, all those sorts of things. That's above the surface, which might be visible to other people. You don't know what's going on below the surface. So if you see something going on, I think it's a courteous and respectful and loving and caring thing to actually ask rather than assume.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that wonderful distinction. And you mentioned the 4 Fs, and I know that you spoke about these at the Teachers Matter conference at the beginning of the year in Sydney. So tell us about the 4 Fs.
You always have to be so careful with the 4 Fs.
We're all curious now.
Some people think of only 3, but the research says there are 4. And 2 are the most well-known. We go into flight mode. We run away from things. And all of these are just ancient physiological responses to the saber-toothed tiger. So 1 F is for flight. 1 is, and you see that when people withdraw, they go quiet, they don't turn up. With kids, I imagine their behaviour becomes very... It would be interesting to know what teachers think that the flight examples are for kids. Then there's fight. You see the aggression, and you see that in adults. It can come out as anger, it can come out as sarcasm, it can come out as bullying, harassment, all those things that we really don't want to see. The freeze thing is when people literally, we used to talk about the deer in the headlights, and it's when people just don't know what to do. And I think we're seeing an enormous amount of that right now. The emotional overload, the mental overload, there's so much uncertainty out there, so much unpredictability out there that people have gone not necessarily into flight or to fight mode, but absolutely into freeze. They can't make decisions. They're stuck.
We see this. Sorry, Anne, we see this when teachers also just ask a student a question. What's the answer to that question? Tell me what you know. And without any warning, and you see that whole freeze because they haven't got time to think. They're expected to answer really quickly. So it's a strategy we definitely talk to teachers about not asking children, give them in 3 minutes or give them some think time. I'm going to ask you about,
Yeah. Let me come back to that, because I want to make one point about that, which is really I find quite interesting. The 4th F is flock, and that is we get together and talk, and you can see that in the explosion of social media and the way that everybody is online chattering away in a way that we use social media to abundance pre-COVID, but now it is almost the way in which we communicate, because we can't do so much face-to-face. Let me come back to that. Ask the kid on the moment, in the moment. It's the same with an adult. There are many reasons, of course, why that could be challenging to someone, but one thing to think about is that for extroverts, that's not a problem, because we don't know what we're going to say anyway until our mouths are doing this. This is thinking for an extrovert. But for introverts, they need a little bit more warning, because they do have to think about what they're going to say. So even in the most rudimentary style, because we do, personality examples will tell us that we can work out whether somebody thinks with their mouth or quietly. Just even being aware of that and knowing you might have to give someone a little bit of notice and say, look, I'm just going to ask everybody a question. This is the question. I'll come to you. That's already giving the introverts a moment to compose themselves and think about what they're doing, whereas the extroverts are going, pick me.
That's so true. You must have been in a classroom recently. And Lisa is online watching us right now live, and Lisa's from Malaysia. She's one of my wonderful teachers that I work very closely with, and she's asked about ideas to teach students about the brain to be more, and how to help them be more explicit to understand. And I think this really dovetails into your idea of, is there a map? So how do we understand this minefield? Is there a map of the mind?
Well, no, I wish there was, and there are lots of scientists being paid lots of dollars and getting lots of grants to try to map the mind. I suspect this is something that won't be done in my lifetime. But my sense for teachers and kids is, and already I've got, little great nieces who are teaching me about the amygdala. And I think that's sort of a place to go, to get kids to think, to be able to name what they're feeling. So this is a key part of it. So 2 parts. One is to explain, just in very rudimentary terms, the triune brain, or let's even go to the 2 parts of the brain, the thinking brain and the emotional brain, just to explain that in simple terms so kids understand that that's how we are biologically constructed. And then to be able to teach them an emotional vocabulary, because if you come back to what I was talking about earlier, that stress signature, that's recognizing the physiological stuff. But when it comes to managing this minefield, mapping your way through, getting to another side, or preparing yourself for anything that might come your way, you may recall that I have a model which is called STAR: stop, think, act, rewire. And the stop, the S, stands for that ability to actually identify your stress signature. So stop, identify what your body is feeling, and think. One part of that is to be able to label it, because we have a saying that says, if you can name it, you can tame it. If you can name your emotion, you can tame your emotion. And yet, and this is a skill I think teachers would do kids an enormous service to as they get older, to be able to recognize what's happening in their body and be able to name an emotion. I am staggered at the number of adults whose emotional vocabulary is so limited. And you say, how are you going? I'm good. Well, what's good? Oh, okay, I'm fine. Well, what does that mean? and does that mean that you are feeling joyful? Does it mean that you're feeling vital? Does it mean that you're feeling content? Does it mean that you're feeling calm? Does it just mean that right at this moment you aren't tamping your feet? I don't know what I'm good means. So
I have to say, Anne, I've got teenagers and I don't even get good, I get
So maybe that's where we need to start, actually translating that into something.
I was work today.
Start there.
Yeah. And another teacher that I'm working very closely with is online, and she's just said that there's a few of those extroverts in her class who think out loud. But Anna, I know you've got 2 boys. You wait until they get to 20. It's like,
Is it a boy thing or a girl thing?
I don't know. My girls just say they have a few more syllables, but not much more.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. So running out of time here. Tell us about how we manage all of this. What are some of the strategies to be able to manage these, understanding the emotions? You talked about the STAR. So stop, think,
act. And rewire, reframe. So you've stopped. You've got your stress signature. You've done a lot of, and amazingly, lots of people. And I would ask everybody online right now to say, what's your body doing right now? Now, hopefully you're engaged and you're relaxed and so on. But in a stress situation, what does your body do? Notice that. So that's the S. And then think, how can you label it? And then as part of labeling it, what you could also be doing is anticipating and visualizing, is this the response I want to be giving, or would there be a different or better response in this situation? Because if it's a threat, a perceived threat, but not a real threat, there isn't actually a saber-toothed tiger coming from you. You just think there is. And remember how the media is just feeding us with all of this stuff at the moment. Just breathe. Just breathe is one of those actions that you can take. So the action is, very often it's around even changing your physiology at that moment. So even if you just stand up or slightly shift, or I make people laugh by saying, as part of you, just breathe and put your thumb in your belly button and breathe out. And it just distracts you. The whole idea is to distract the amygdala and also give it permission to stand down, to sort of say, I've got this, thanks for the warning. It was you wouldn't have this conversation, but essentially what you're saying to the amygdala is, it was a psychological threat. It's not a physical threat. I'm in control. My brain's got it. Thanks. Go away. And just by doing something physiologically, you can actually change that. And then the R is rewire, reframe. And that means, and it's not something we're really good at, it's how can we actually reflect on how I could have done that better? Mm. So when you go for a walk, or because building your physical fitness is an important part of your mental fitness. When you're doing whatever exercise it is, even if you just do it every now and again, think about a situation where you wish you had done it differently, and how would you have done it differently, and just replay it out in your mind. Because otherwise, unfortunately, we are doomed to repeat the same thing over.
Isn't that true?
Over again.
I have to say, this amygdala is an amazing part of our brain, because you talked about whether it's real threat or perceived threat. And I was out walking in the bush in Australia a couple of years ago on my own, and come around the corner, and there's this long squiggly thing on the path. And of course, we have no poisonous anything in New Zealand that could kill us. And it's like, it's a snake. And so I was like really thankful that my amygdala is like, threat, freeze, don't move. But then I was able to take stock and go, well, it's not moving. Would there be snakes here? Didn't know the answer to that question, but it was one that went through my mind. And it turned out to be a stick.
And that's a classic example, and one I give all the time. And it's not just the physical thing, it's the words that we hear, it's the smells that we get. Mm-hmm. We go, oh my God, something's burning, and you go into, oh my God, it's panic mode, and then you realise that the smell is coming from somebody else's place on the other side of the street. Well, you'd still actually perhaps go into, let's see if we can assist mode, but it's a different mode. And so it's all about being able to quickly evaluate what the warning sign is, and is it real for me right now, or am I just making assumptions?
Yeah, particularly in this COVID world, I think that's a really good distinction. Is this real or is it perceived? Am I really in threat? Am I really need to take action or not? And as we begin to finish up, any other final things you want to share with our viewers?
I don't know, Karen, if you've ever been or heard of the amazing place Lightning Ridge in Australia. It is, if you think about the ultimate outback movie in Australia, the kind of Paul Hogan thing with the hat and the badges, and the guys out there, big bushy beards, let your mind go wild about what a typical outback scene is like. And Lightning Ridge is all of that and a whole load more. I mean, it is weird. We were out there recently. It's famous for its opal mines, black opals in particular. And we went out right into the opal mining area. And there are a whole series of unregistered vehicles out there. I mean, it's all dirt roads, unregistered vehicles. Doesn't surprise you to know that they were also unroadworthy. I mean, there's a connection between the two. Why am I telling you this? Because when we were out there in the midst of all this dirt, dust, guys with bushy beards and things on their shoulder, it was just bizarre. We saw the most amazing sign on a tree. And the sign said, "Cars with brakes, give way."
I remember seeing that on your Facebook page. I loved that. Cars with brakes, give way.
Cars with brakes, give way. And for me, the reason I want to continue to spread this message about the minefield and all the things you can do about it is because if we're the ones who've got brakes, then we're in a position to help others. And sometimes we can't see what we're going through ourselves. And we need somebody else's eyes and perception to pick it up for us, and particularly in the mental health field at the moment, when so many people are struggling, so many people are anxious, so many people are going to a black place. We kind of need to be the people, because we can look after ourselves, we can offer a helping hand to others. So that for me is kind of how I would bring this to an end, to say learning about this is not just simply in the service of ourselves, and we have to do that first, self-awareness being the absolute fundamental point, but it enables us to be in service of others. And my favourite T-shirt of all time is one that I almost wore and thought better of it, but my favourite T-shirt at the moment simply says, "Make empathy great again."
I love that. You should have worn that, and that would have been wonderful. That is awesome. Look, Anne, thank you so much for an enlightening and fascinating conversation. We've got people listening from Malaysia, New Zealand, Eva's from Greece. So we've got a wonderful global audience, and I know so many more will benefit from this talk that chat that we've had today. And of course, Anne speaks at conferences, so if you want her to do that, we'll put her details down in the chat box. So Anne, thank you so much. I know there's so much more we could cover, but in our short wee time, that's it for tonight, and maybe we can get you back again. So to my wonderful viewers, the Teachers Matter, no, it's not the Teachers Matter, the Parent Summit, so many things happening in this office. The Parent Summit happens in 2 days' time on Friday. We are launching, it starts our Parenting for Resilience, Confidence and Independence. Go to the spectrumeducation.com website and you'll find all the details there, and I hope to see you there. And next week on Spectrum TV, next week we have Sally Foley-Lewis, who's a friend of both and mine, and she is a wonderful expert on leadership, delegation, building those incredible relationships. And I know that is a session really not to be missed. So, and thank you again so much. And I look forward to seeing everybody else next week. So bye for now. Keep safe and keep learning.